Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well and welcome back to the All Words Are Free podcast. So this is kind of a landmark. We're on episode 10. It's very fun. A couple of quick things before we carry on. I've decided to cut the outfit of the day section. The speaking bit, at least, maybe I might still do the little pictogram things. I kind of went onto Canva product placement and really enjoyed that, so that was quite fun. But I don't know, I'm not going to do it this time, and if anyone thinks, oh no, it was nice, then please say and I'll put it back in. But yeah, just felt that maybe it kind of stunted the episode a bit. It felt like it was just an added thing that really wasn't that necessary, and I could have just got into the topic straight away. So I'm going to leave it out for now. I'm open. My ears are open. I'm open to ideas. I'm trying to think of a distinct phrase, but my mind is just not there right now. So, great stuff. But yes, today we're going to be talking about writing. My first love, my favourite thing. We're going to be discussing the worth of writing, or how it makes us feel, and why as humans we do write, and why we feel almost a need to sometimes, or the cathartic properties of writing, and also some controversial topics around writing as well. So without further ado, let's get started. The quote that has inspired today's episode is a quote from a written piece by my friend Rebecca from the Substack No Plan. And if you want to hear some of Rebecca's thoughts, there is my last podcast episode where we had a bit of a chat at Edinburgh Fringe. And then also just please check out her stuff because it's very good and very nice written pieces. The quote is, "People love to make art about making art." And this is exactly what I'm doing right now, to be honest. But yeah, it's interesting because, you see documentaries about painters or writers or dancers or singers or anything like that. You've got biopics, and I don't know, it's quite interesting that there's almost there's different levels of human creativity. The creativity that generates something like a novel, and then the offshoots from that, the fan fictions, the fan art, the documentaries, the way in which people write about other people's work, but also the way in which people write about their own work or write about the act of creating something. I've written many a piece regarding writing itself. I have a written piece about how I was very uninspired, or a piece about why I love writing, which is essentially this episode too. So yeah, I do find myself thinking about the actual act of writing a lot. Obviously at the moment I'm working on my second novel, so that definitely factors into it, considering I'm literally thinking about writing every day. But one of my characters is a writer, a secret writer, but she is a writer. And I find myself drawn to very poetic descriptions of why she writes, the manner in which she writes, her hopes for writing. And I actually have excerpts from letters and from her own writing, well, not very frequently, within the novel. And so I'm writing about writing by showing her own work. And I find when I'm writing characters and they're seeing things from their perspective, even though it's a third-person novel, it's almost allowing me to enter into them and enter their space and be them almost for a minute when I write her opinions, her excerpts from her letters. And I also write about books and reading and consuming work as well as the actual act of writing it. And I find it really lovely when I feel, inspired by a particular quote from a writer. I mean, the whole concept behind my podcast is that each episode is inspired by a quote. And I love putting quotes into my work, or being inspired by a quote, or reframing a quote in the bulk of my own writing, and then something else, a scenario perhaps. I went to when I was in Edinburgh, I went to the Writers' Museum. So it was Robert Burns, Walter Scott, and Robert Louis Stevenson. And they each had their own rooms, or like a couple of rooms, sort of discussing their lives and everything. And it feels really strange to think these people are actually there and living a particular point. It's strange to sort of come to terms with the fact that these great figures were real people with hopes and aspirations. And of course they were, but to actually imagine them walking around the place that you are presently in and being living and starting somewhere, and it's strange. You almost see them as characters. They feel as real to you as Miss Havisham or Mr. Darcy or any quite significant literary characters or keystone literary characters. You know that they're people, and they were real people with all the facets of being human. But I find it really, the only word I can think of is odd to sort of really think about them living their lives. I suppose it's a time thing more than anything. But you see like Victorian times portrayed on the TV, and I don't know, it's strange that that actually was the way of life X years ago. X years ago this was there, or this pub was still open, or this field was still a field and not covered in buildings. I don't know, maybe that's very romantic of me, but I am a romantic at heart, a literary romantic. To make the discernible difference between literary romantic and actual romantic. But yeah, I don't know, I'm like being very reflective, as I tend to be. But back onto the topic of actually writing, I used there were a couple of quotes in that museum that I took a picture of, and I have used to either inspire a section of my work or actually directly having a character say things, even if it's only a little chunk, copyright. But I get my inspiration from a lot of places, and reading other work is primarily where you gain your inspiration from. And so by reading and then feeling inspired, that author has also felt inspired from a particular source, and it's almost this continual stream of inspiration and this continual cycle of creation and appreciation. And in writing, you are both portraying your own story and the stories of others. You are constructing a message from your subconscious. It's so beautiful to see people's experiences and lives on a page, fiction or non-fiction, no matter what form. Creativity is a natural facet of being human, right? So it's interesting to see how different people express themselves as well. Some people express themselves artistically. Some people express themselves in a lot of different ways, and that's what's so magical about it, I suppose. People's different preferences. So, while I've touted my endless sources of inspiration, let's talk about writer's block. So, sometimes I have this real drive to write something. I'm like, you know what? I love these characters. I'm listening to my playlist. Things are slaying. I'm thinking of them in different scenarios. I'm picturing the scenes, but the words just don't come. And it's so frustrating because feeling no inspiration at all and then just not being able to write, I'm like, right, okay, fine. It's annoying, but I can forgive it, especially when you have the time to write. I'm like, oh my God, I've got a solid afternoon where I don't have to do anything else. Let's do some writing. And then you get there and you're like, I cannot fill this page. And while that is frustrating, maybe you can go and do something else. But when you feel like really, really inspired, but you just can't put words onto you can't think of the right words. You feel really inspired, but it's like you're struggling to place the words in the right order or think of the right words or write without repeating yourself a lot. I find that sometimes it might be a simple reason. I might be tired, or it's like, okay, maybe I'm hungry, or like, oh, maybe I should just take the afternoon off. Taking the afternoon off is like sacrilege to me, honestly. Like, taking time off, who is she? But anyway, yeah, so you're like repeating the same phrases or same words, or whenever I'm trying to come up with something, it's always the same thing that comes to mind. And sometimes you feel like there's such a block because you don't want to repeat yourself too much. I don't want to talk about somebody's eyes, or I don't want to say they're turning to face somebody like every single paragraph. I want something a bit different, which is when I tend to delve into more abstract description. Sometimes when I'm feeling such a block, it feels kind of disheartening because you feel, or at least I do, I feel that maybe, oh, well, I clearly don't have very good handle on good words and phrasing and this poetic style that I so want to embody, or that I say is there in my novel. It does feel very disheartening when you can't come up with anything. So if that happens, I tend to go into more abstract sort of descriptions. Try and change the scenario as well. So I have fragments of scenes with an ellipses to say that there needs to be more at the end or needs to be more at the beginning. Sometimes I start halfway through a scene. But that's just how I write. I don't write chronologically, which may sound nightmarish. But I'm very organised, so I know what I've done. It's just, but yeah, I'll go into a more abstract description, maybe just think about a particular scene, start writing something, and then it might feel more inspired, and then add the people in and the speech in. Or maybe it's just a little descriptive section that can be popped in somewhere. Somebody thinking deeply about something. That tends to happen quite a lot. So, maybe we'll elaborate. But I find reading other authors very enlightening for language and words. I feel like sometimes not relying too much on the thesaurus, because I almost use it as a springing board, like a place for inspiration, rather than just using a thesaurus willy-nilly, because then words don't seem to fit quite right. But sometimes I do feel like, do I not know words? Where my words are not coming to me? And there's nothing wrong with saying simple things like said and the, but sometimes you do feel like you want to be a bit more flowery, especially me with the sort of poetic style that I so want to encapsulate. But I do find reading other people really helpful, especially for vocabulary. That was the word. I've been looking for the word. I've been thinking, like, what is the right word for vocabulary? So reading people like Hanya Yanagara. At the moment, I'm reading A Little Life. I've actually nearly finished it. And it's one of those things I don't want to finish it because it's been so wonderful. It's been such a journey, and you do end up loving the characters, especially with a book that's 720 pages long. I love it. It's a little world that I've stepped into momentarily. So that's very inspiring because it helps you to widen your vocab as well as, enjoying the story and seeing how it's crafted. I love the poetic style, and I think I definitely, it's not discernible to other people, I don't think. I think it's, and when I'm reading the whole novel, it's not noticeable in the throw of it. My style is consistent and my style is my own, but I can see the inspiration at the particular time within how I write. So for example, when I was reading Middlemarch, I could tell or I read a section back and think, oh, well, I was definitely reading Dickens at this point. And I can tell that Hanya Yanagara's work has also influenced how I write, has influenced a couple of sections and inspirations as well, which I find quite wonderful. Different. I'd be reading a book and a scenario happens, or a certain emotion is expressed, or a character acts in a certain way, and that inspires me for my own novel. Thinking, oh, well, my character could do this. And then it adds in a scenario that wouldn't have been there if I hadn't have read that book. So that's why I think that, reading perhaps can be seen as unproductive, because reading is a pastime, it's a leisure, especially fiction reading. But I feel that it does inspire me so much and it gives me so much that now I've managed to sort of get out of that mindset and just see it as A, enjoyment, but also B, it's a place in which I can feel relaxed and inspired and can take me towards success perhaps in other ways. But yeah, when I'm feeling blocked, sometimes I might read instead, although it becomes slightly restless. I become slightly restless in the fact that I'm reading and I'm like, but I should be working. But that's my problem. There's a wonderful quote from, just drinking my coffee break. There's a wonderful quote from a writer called Maxine Williams on Substack as well. And we'll get onto the conversation of writers on Substack soon. I suppose writing about writing, ultimately, this is Substack. This is the community of writers. But yes, Maxine Williams talks about the fear of running out of things to say or never feeling inspired again, to paraphrase. And it really is. You can't quite understand it until you've been in that position. But it really does feel sometimes that you've just lost every capacity to write. You can't do it. You're never gonna be able to write a word again, and you feel so forlorn. I feel so forlorn. But it's really not the case. But you're just like, oh my god, I can't do this. I'm never gonna. No, okay, calm down. I've had days where I have felt very not disenfranchised, but separated from being a writer, from the state of being a writer. I feel very divided from that. I feel shut off. That writing was the thing for me, the thing that I wanted to be and do. And there are those days where you just completely lack inspiration, and I guess it almost coincides with a fear that you're not cut out for it, or you've lost all your skill. I remember when I was writing a lot of poetry and going to a lot of poetry events, and I'd won awards, and I was Young Poet Laureate for Staffordshire, and that was incredible. And I was writing a lot of poetry, and you look back on work and think that is awful, but experience brings that, right? I was about 16 at the time, so it was 5 years ago. Of course I'm going to change, but also when, say for example, I haven't written a poem in a long time, I might come around to doing it again, or maybe think, oh, I'll fancy writing a poem, let's do it. Sometimes when I fancy writing a poem, it does just happen. I don't really write poetry that much anymore, even though it did feel it felt like the writing style for me. I felt some affinity with it, and I don't know, I enjoyed it. I think the short bursts of inspiration and emotion kind of helped. But I know I miss poetry in a sense, and when I hadn't written in a while because of exams and other demands, I felt afraid that I'd lose what I'd nurtured. I was writing poetry a lot when I was going to these events, and having not done it for a while, it felt scary to kind of step back into it, which again is a reason why I probably didn't do it for as long as I could have done. I didn't do it for a while, and there's a fear of stepping back into it and having completely lost any skill at all, and my writing just being absolute drivel, and the style just combusting and not having the nuance or the beauty of what I had previously created. And it's not that simple. Stuff doesn't leave you. Sure, stuff can lose a bit of refinement, but skills like that or an ability to phrase things or your perception of the world, that doesn't change with not practicing the skill. Your perception of the world will change with your experiences, and that will influence how you write, but it won't change your ability to write. By doing something frequently, you do nurture it as a skill, but sometimes I suppose writing is more about expression than quality, perhaps. I suppose it depends what you want your writing to do. I mean, me, myself, I love writing as an expression, but I also want it to be good, which is why I go back and edit things. But I love when it sounds very self-indulgent, but I like when I read back on my own work and see and really enjoy it, or I'm really proud of what's there, or it really makes me feel something. I suppose from a personal standpoint, it makes me feel something because I have injected my own emotion into it, but also when I just feel so with the characters or excited or I feel the tension or the sadness or the suspense or whatever, it's nice to feel that myself, because that's a preface to other people feeling it when they read it, if they read it, of course. Depends whether things get published, but that sort of leads on to another topic that I wanted to talk about, which was the fear of exposure or getting work out there. So the steps that you have to take to actually get your work published and seen by a wide audience are long. You send stuff off to agents and it's like 6 to 8 weeks wait, which is fine, but sometimes you're waiting months or even years to actually get things picked up. I'm in a nice place right now where I feel I have a path, both in writing. I'll continue to write. I'll continue to love my characters, and I will keep sending to agents and things, and hope to hear hope to hear back if you're listening. But I've also got a solid path in science, which is another love of mine. I know what I want to do there, so I feel in a position where I feel very sure, which I haven't had before. So that's quite nice. But the steps to getting your work out there is so difficult. Literary agents have a lot to look through, so it's understandable whether they can't reply to everyone. It's no less disheartening. But yes, getting your work out there, it took me a while to actually, my first novel was kind of ready, and I was procrastinating. Basically, I was putting it off, sending it off, but you just have to take that leap. I do this a lot, so I put things off and then I'm suddenly like, no, we're going to do it, we're going to get it off, done, bam. I did. I started setting off and kept going from there. I look back and some of the cover letters or some of the documents I sent were like, oh, maybe it's not there. I probably didn't send the right thing there, or like, oh, it's a bit of an error there, or like, oh God. So I've kind of done myself in a bit. So I think in the urgency of getting stuff out there, it's actually Sometimes I just get stuff out and get stuff done, maybe not to the best quality, just because I'm like, I need to get it done. If I don't get it done now, I just want to get it done, which is a fault in itself, I suppose. But actually getting your work out there and having people to read it, something that you love so much and you've put so much time into, it's scary. It's really scary, because pressing publish on something that you've invested in, it's almost exposing yourself to the reader, because your thoughts are within that. And if it's a non-fiction piece, of course, your thoughts are within that, and then the way in which you've crafted it is automatically a part of you or a reflection of you, how you frame things. And it's a big thing to even put yourself out there in the first place. As Rebecca says in an article or a piece, a thought piece, she says that the idea of the creative outlet is almost synonymous with judgment. And yeah, I think in putting your things out there, you know that people are going to have opinions. No matter if they read it and like it or feel ambivalent or don't like it, there is an opinion attached to that. And people have thoughts that may not correlate directly with your own, and it's scary to see what people think. But I also love fostering conversation, and that's what this is about. This podcast is Substack. I want to foster conversation, but to foster conversation, you have to put your thoughts out there. You have to trigger it, and that's a big step to take. Another thing that one could do if they're feeling a bit blocked is storyboard. I love when I first started like thinking of my first novel, so this was like 4 years ago, my god, about 4 years ago, I started mood boards and things, and while to a certain extent it was slight procrastination, it's also, if you're feeling a little bit uninspired, it's quite fun to just create your mood board, because it at least gets you in the state of mind or the frame of your story, particularly for like fiction, but non-fiction as well. You know, you could place things. I think planning always helps. It gets you in the mindset, it gets you excited and inspired, and gives you some sort of order to the thoughts. So that's why I like storyboarding. I like writing the lists of scenarios and to-do lists for scenarios, or keeping things in a certain order or ordered in my head, and looking at pictures of like character inspiration or scenes. That always really helps as well, just to, I don't know, give me that lift and that excitement for what I'm writing. And also for music as well, I have a novel playlist. I have 2 novel playlists actually, novel 1 and novel 2, and they really do help sometimes. Like sometimes I'm just walking down the street and I listen to them and I feel excited about my characters. It's really nice. You can picture scenarios with alongside the songs. Movie fashion. These novels are destined to be a best-selling film, by the way. Box office hit, if one will. But no, it kind of helps. It's interesting to hear about different writers' processes, really famous writers' processes. I looked the other day of Agatha Christie, and again, this is the idea of watching things about writers and seeing their process, or seeing how they did it and their lives, and I don't know, it's kind of inspiring, but also I guess it's always brings them down to earth a bit, and just seeing that they are actually people too. But yeah, Agatha Christie, she kept loads of little notebooks with notes in and characters and drafts, and Tolkien did a lot of in-depth sort of work. Everything stemmed from folklore or real factual things, and then they branched off from there. He created his own language. He really delved into that world, and by delving into that world, it's almost comes naturally, perhaps. I mean, I'm not saying it was easy for him, but when you're writing, you've created that universe to a large degree, when Tolkien is concerned, and by situating yourself within that universe and investing all that time in it, the passion behind that. And that's why, doing little things like your storyboarding or your curating your playlists, it's just as valuable as the writing itself, because it's fostering your love for the characters. And it's also ordering things. By having a plan, you allow yourself some structure, and you give yourself goals too. And by having goals, you maybe feel a greater sense of achievement when you've completed a chapter or a scenario or a character's storyline. It's interesting to consider writing as a profession in itself. There are many people who wish for writing to be their sole income and to have economic security in it. An article by Alicia Kennedy, which is linked below, talks about a creator economy trade-off. The idea of predictable instability for unpredictable instability. The idea that as a writer, the instability, the economic instability is predictable. It's very up and down. It's, you have a bestseller, but then you have to write something else. Or maybe you produce something and a lot of funds have gone into it and then it doesn't do as well. But having that work and something to strive towards is still better than this unpredictable instability where you potentially have nothing else. If writing is your sole income, then at least you know what to expect economically, whereas if you didn't have it and you didn't have anything else, anything could happen. Also with writing, it's a well-told story, right? People know that writing, unless you become a big name, is not the most stable of careers. And that is expected. Whereas in other professions, it's less charted territory. People are uncertain. And so at least writing has that common, almost, thread or predictable thread of what is to come. And this sort of comes on to the amateur writer story. So a lot of people now will, for example, on Substack, there is a vast community of writers, which is beautiful. It's lovely to see the numbers of voices from different backgrounds and different experiences. I suppose this takes me on to Emily Sundberg's sort of infamous, I guess, article that was released fairly recently. I guess I'm a bit late to the bandwagon, but I'm not jumping on a bandwagon. It just happens to be appropriate for this episode. And I agree with a lot of the things she says. I think when we're talking monetization and career, there are a lot of amateur writers now being able to make money from monetizing things like their Substack, which is wonderful. People are managing to foster a career or an income from something that they love. But as Emily says, it's almost becoming monetization of diary entries. It's not... People monetize because they can, and it's become a sea of similar works rather than everything being of unique value. There are a plethora of writers out there, not just on Substack, but generally. You know, in the writers' market, you see a bookshelf with so many different names on and so many different experiences. And again, this is wonderful. But it also makes it very difficult now for people to stand out, but be that to literary agents or be that on the shelves. It makes it tricky to make it in writing. Perhaps more difficult than it used to be. I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for the Robert Burnses of the past, but it seems that it will be more difficult, for example, for me to gain a literary agent and get my work published when it seems that I've met so many people in the same boat, even just my age, and there are going to be millions of people doing the same thing. And to get yourself seen, it's going to be really difficult. It's hard. It's a complex topic, but yes, Emily goes on to sort of discuss how similar content has become across Substack. That if you blacked out the names, you won't be able to tell them apart. And in this way, is there a lack of authenticity to the work? If people are just using the Substack or the publishing as diary entries, they're not necessarily going back and editing and refining stuff where, you know, there's some people on the platform who are trying to do that and are trying to make something maybe into a career, but they want to write differently to what is popular. They get lost beneath the sort of the repetitive nature of a lot of these pieces. And while there is not necessarily a lack of value in these pieces, one may question whether people are just emanating a style because it is what's popular. They're managing to monetize and gain financially from something that is just part of the zeitgeist, that is popular within a given time, and therefore they feel it's how they can maybe hack the system. It's quite sad to potentially see people stunting their own expression and creativity for what is deemed to be the thing, the in thing, what's in vogue. And then there are people who maybe they're not aspiring writers, they're just, I'm going to be careful here with what I say, but like people who potentially aren't aspiring to be a novelist or an essayist or maybe make something more critical. They're just writing about their day, or they just see Substack as less of a writer's community, which I feel is at the core of it, and more somewhere where they can put their thoughts like an Instagram story and then gain money from it. I think it's quite sad to see the dilution of maybe what Substack was meant for, or this writer's community that I believed I was entering into. I don't think that screening writers or anything like that, I think ultimately anyone should be able to have a platform, and Substack is a platform as anything else. But I understand what Emily is saying in the way that everything seems to be very whitewashed, very similar. And it's a shame that people with maybe more unique insight or letting themselves just express themselves as they wish, getting lost within that. It comes to what the value is, really, or what deems a piece of writing as valuable. Is it the expression itself, or is it the making money? Is the value in the writer's release? Is it the way in which readers can react to that? Is it the emotions that the readers feel from that piece, or their ability to identify with that piece? Or is it just the financial gain? Do we aspire to professionalism for fame and money, or for security, or just to live doing something we love? Is it writing with the consequence of becoming known, or is it the desire to be known and therefore forcing that through with writing? To be a great novelist is a rare thing, and something that maybe quite a lot of people aspire to. It's a tricky thing, and perhaps a little bit of a paradox. And it's interesting to think about. I read back my work, especially this second novel, and only I have seen it, and I read stuff back, and I see things I phrases I love, or scenarios that I've created, and I feel very proud, and I genuinely do have a connection with that world and my characters, and I feel there is worth in that. But is that what we can class as worthy? Is a piece of writing worthy because we deem it to be, and because it has been created with our own personal pen? Or is it only worthy when other people see it and deem it so? And yeah, I think another interesting point, I've got a few quotes from Emily here, and Emily's friends and things that were in the article, which I believe I've covered actually in what I've just said. But yeah, I think a couple that stood out to me: high performance in these niche online circles doesn't translate to actual quality, and those with more serious ambitions may feel that they have to skew to more popular content or bait. There's an urge to try and monetize everything, not necessarily from someone's fault, but just because that is the way of the world now. To, YouTube, Instagram, Substack, there's an ability to monetize, and therefore, why not give it a go? And again, that leads to the conversation of, well, is the worth in people paying for it, or is the worth in just putting it out there and allowing people to see your work and having that self-expression? It's tricky. You can't make a living out of people seeing it, but you can make a living out of people paying for it. And so it becomes difficult when you want to be a writer, you aspire to be a writer, you want your experiences and your expression to have meaning to other people, and you want to say something to your audience, the world. You want that out there on paper. You want that life, to be able to express yourself, to have that as your career. But to do that, you must sell. And talking about experiences, there was a quote in Emily's article which I found really interesting, where the phenomenon of offering excessive personal access for the sake of it. I do think that's interesting, because a lot of the popular content right now is these sort of unadulterated, unapologetic diary style pieces. And Bo actually mentions this in one of their articles, saying that this idea of oversharing I myself am also a very open person, and I will gladly talk about certain topics and discuss certain things. But I also know when there is a, perhaps I'm more open than other people, and so I understand that sometimes, like, stuff that I would gladly say or talk to someone about, maybe they aren't open to that, they aren't ready for that, they aren't in that place, and that's fine. Different people have different levels of tolerance or different ideas of conversation, and ultimately you don't have to talk about darkness all the time. Some people don't want to share all of themselves, and that's okay. People are entitled to their privacy. I know when to stop, at which point that it isn't right to talk about things. And sometimes I want to and stop myself because I maybe am unsure of what the other person will say. Maybe they feel it's oversharing. And what writing does is it allows me to say things in more abstracted terms. It allows me to infuse my own thoughts through my characters. It allows me to question things and explore things and discover something about myself too. I read things back and I see where I was in that moment. And there is that catharsis in writing. Something I looked into was the sort of science around writing and why we write, and again, the idea of release. And an article that is also linked below, that writing to yourself and just writing something, it doesn't necessarily have to be a poetic masterpiece, it doesn't have to be shared, it can be in a personal journal, but that writing to yourself is an expressive method with proven cathartic benefits. And catharsis is defined as eliminating a complex by recalling it to conscious awareness and allowing it to be expressed. So I found this in grief. I wrote about grief. I wrote little paragraphs on grief, be they, I don't know, descriptive. I can't really place them. They're not fiction, they're not non-fiction, they're just emotive. They're emotional, they're expression. It's not a poem, but it's a paragraph of words that felt right. And it is, I think, perhaps one automatically buries things or keeps things down or doesn't recognise things, and for me it is in my writing that I can express these emotions and share. And this goes back to the oversharing thing, the idea that maybe by my writing being personal, it is because it is things that I feel can't be said. And I think people should be able to express that, but maybe just warn people of the content. Or I know there's a thing about now where people are, again, unapologetically them or releasing everything, and sometimes maybe people feel that they have to because that is what is popular and that is what is gaining an audience and money. For me, writing is the way to express these innermost thoughts, perhaps without even realising, having never been able to articulate it to myself. And when I read works, you can see that I can identify with things sometimes that I hadn't really been able to articulate otherwise. A Little Life, circling back, has done that for me in some ways. And by feeling that, it allows you to connect with the work, and by expressing that to yourself in your own writing, you can reckon with those emotions, and that is that feeling of catharsis. the article goes on to say that it doesn't need to be eloquent or skilled. You can take these fragmented thoughts or even traumatic events and put them in a particular order. And without even realising it, you have almost given yourself a personal therapy, in a sense. Although that sounds very cliche, but it is special, I think, to be able to have a format where, in some unexplained way, it just manages to help me articulate things and express things in a very poetic way. I feel like when you're talking to somebody, you can't start talking about, like, you can't start talking in poems and in really abstracted ways. But sometimes abstracted ways are the perfect ways to describe things too. And actually, as a random fun fact, apparently journaling once a week improved people's motivations. But when you do it every day, it became routine. Interesting. But I also find that with writing as well sometimes, that like, if you're doing it every day, it somewhat feels a bit of a slog and a chore. Whereas if you do it like every so often, it feels a bit more like exciting, and when something's a bit rarer, it automatically does feel a bit more like having a lot of fun here. Yeah, I do find that with writing sometimes you're like, I'm going to write today, I'm going to write tomorrow, I'm going to go to the cafe tomorrow and start writing, and sometimes you're not feeling inspired in that moment. And I think sometimes I feel pressure, and it's only self-inflicted pressure, but to like get it done because I plan to do it in those hours, and it's, I don't know, sucks the enjoyment from it a bit, I guess. But yeah, I don't know, I think that's almost everything. I also had a little Bridgerton bit as well. Oh my god, I know, I need to stop. The idea that in season 3, Penelope, her writing is her escape, but because she's socialised as a woman, she can't pursue it like Colin attempts to. I think it's interesting to see how they used what is a less talented male to illustrate the disparity here. The idea that as a woman, she's extremely talented and eloquent, but she can't make that into a career, or at least an open career. She can't confess, even though she does in the end, but spoilers. But she couldn't have just written as Penelope and made that into a career. She had to go under the guise of Lady Whistledown, whereas Colin, who is a man, can just openly try, and it's fine. But they made him less talented to just sort of like drive the point home, which I guess is a fair comparison, because ultimately there's probably so many talented women who couldn't get their things out there when men could, and maybe they weren't as talented as the women, but also, there are a lot of talented men out there. I mean, that was just a little like side note, a bit more frivolous as well. I mean, I say frivolous, it was all about like gender, socialization, but I think I intended the science bit to be more frivolous as well, but maybe not. But that's pretty much everything I have to say for this one. I think I've already expressed this multiple times, but writing is very special and expression is very special. And in this podcast, in talking and articulating my thoughts, or just speaking, and hopefully somebody hears this and feels like they can identify with it, or feel seen, or has a good time. Maybe I'm likable, I hope so. Somebody please comment, say hello, know you're there. I don't know, but this will be going up soon, and also on YouTube. I was contemplating doing actual videos for YouTube, But that was when I was feeling like really personable, and right now I'm feeling like a hermit, so maybe not. We'll see. Yeah, my moods go up and down, and I create anyway. But we will see. Today was a good day. I was feeling very, very podcast in it. I've not been feeling very podcasty recently. I've kind of struggled. I've had a week where I was really putting off editing my Edinburgh Fringe special because I just wasn't in it. And then I felt quite inspired, and I wrote my Edinburgh Fringe piece, and things were going well. So I guess it's just a cycle of inspiration. It always hits around the same time. I have a few days where I'm like, I hate everything. I don't feel inspired for this, but I feel inspired for other things, so it's nice. But there's also deadlines, self-inflicted deadlines, but deadlines all the same. But I'm rambling now, so I will leave you alone. I will leave your ears alone. Go for a walk. That's always nice. Always very releasing for me, at least. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, or have had a wonderful day, depending on what time you listen to this. And I hope to... I always trip up on this bit, because I was like, I hope to hear you next time, but I hope to have you again with me next time. And yeah, take care, and let's keep talking.